Great. Thank you so much, Denise. I'm really excited to be talking about a topic that I'm really passionate about on both the personal and professional level. I've spent probably last decade and a half looking at social media, privacy issues, online risk, and more recently, in maybe the past 7 years or so, I've started looking at young autistic adults and understanding their experiences. And it's become apparent that there is a huge need for increased safety, education, as well as redesigns of social media. So let me just jump right into this. Just quick, super quick here. I won't even spend too much time here, but just a little bit on my background. I am a computer scientist, but I have specialized in human-computer interaction and look at really the social side, the psychology, the impact on society of technologies. And I do a lot with vulnerable populations, digital literacy, and that's kind of my wheelhouse now. And I also have Kirsten Chapman on. She is leading a lot of the research I'll be talking about, where we have developed interventions for education about social media safety, as well as identifying new risks posed by generative AI, things like ChatGPT, et cetera, for our population, and leading teams that design better solutions and hopefully things that can improve social media in the future. We have a much larger team, of course, and I can't list everybody because it's been a lot over the years, but we are a group of researchers who, a lot of us have close family members on the spectrum, as well as several have worked in more of a professional context with a number of organizations that support adults on the autism spectrum, as well as youth, and also, from the perspective of just being advocates, that I think a lot of our team really comes from that perspective. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about social media. And social media can connect people. There's a lot of literature and research that shows a lot of the social benefits, as well as access to job and employment resources, et cetera. Just a few stats here really show, and these are actually from a few years ago, so it's increased, but a lot of companies are recruiting via social media. Young adults especially are finding jobs through the social media. And there are actually some negative ramifications for not being on social media or using it incorrectly. So definitely folks who have not been hired because of what they're posting, or if they don't have a social media presence, that actually even impacts managers' perceptions to think, oh, that's strange. They don't have social media. What's going on? And so it's almost even though there are also negatives and drawbacks of social media, it's becoming increasingly required to participate in society and to gain a lot of the benefits. Now, research, there's not a lot of research in this space. It is newer, but the little research that is there shows that those on the autism spectrum experience a lot more online harassment and harms than the general population, just online in general. And then our research shows with social media. Now, I just quickly want to acknowledge that there are very different preferences for person first versus identity first language around autism. So, a person with autism would be a person first phrase versus an autistic person would be identity first. And there are very strong feelings about which one is the right way to label, I guess, somebody. And so in our quotes, we use the language that our participants used so that, we respect their wishes. But we do want to acknowledge and realize that regardless of which one we use, there are going to be individuals who probably do not prefer that term. So I apologize up front and make that acknowledgement. Now, over the years, we've held interviews, observation, field site visits, and looked for a lot of feedback from individuals, on the autism spectrum. And in particular, we've actually worked with a lot of organizations that offer day programs or residential programs. So, many of them need a good amount of support in their day-to-day lives. And we've worked with both with and without intellectual disabilities. And, a number of our field sites, they are diagnosed and qualified for state benefits. So that's the population we're looking at. Now we've also engaged with a lot of their support network, those who provide that support on a day-to-day basis. So service providers, parents, family, et cetera. And then, of course, those field sites. Now, we've realized over the years that really a lot of our findings often extend to even those who don't require as substantial support. In fact, a number of our researchers are on the spectrum themselves, and they talk about how in high school or when they were growing up, they struggled with the same thing and they had to learn how to cope and understand how to use social media. So, this is not limited just to this particular population as well. And so today, I'll be sharing the positive and negative impacts of social media use that we've discovered. Again, like I said, it's avoiding social media may actually have a lot of negative consequences as well. And so I think the challenge is really how do we balance the positive and minimize that negative. Also, the individual traits that are unsupported by social media. Why is it so much more harmful? Why are those on the spectrum struggling so much more when they use social media? Well, it's because it's not actually designed to support neurodiversity. And then we talk a little bit about how support networks can help and different mediation strategies we've observed, some that are not very effective and kind of counterproductive, in fact, versus some of the more helpful practices. And then finally, I'll briefly touch on our social media literacy course that we've developed, and we have very promising results. And it is something that we continue to enroll field sites and make available freely, as well as we will be launching an online version for folks to be able to participate, even if you're not associated or taking classes in local programs. So I'll talk about that. And as we go, please do feel free to enter comments. So Kirsten will be monitoring and summarizing and reporting back for us. But questions, comments, if something resonates, or if you have additional thoughts and ideas, we'd love to hear them. That's helped shape a lot of our research directions. Okay, so quickly, just some of the positive outcomes that we've noticed with social media is that there's a lot of benefit to being able to focus on one interest. So offline, it may be really hard to find somebody who wants to talk about Disney 24/7. And online, you actually can do that exactly. You actually can find a group that is just about Disney. And if all you talk about is Disney and you're always talking about that, it is 100% appropriate. In fact, that is what the group is for. And so that has been a huge, huge benefit for a lot of these young adults, which is going on and being able to talk with other people who are interested in that topic and passionate and happy to engage. So that's one huge reason why, despite some negatives that we'll show you later and some pretty severe negatives, a lot of young adults and their families and support network have decided it's worth the risk, or it's just they have to deal with the risk because of this benefit. And I probably don't have to tell you, but a lot of times it is difficult because young adulthood is that hard transition where you receive services, every day at school. There's structure, there's a program, a lot of, relatively speaking, a lot of support compared to once you graduate. And it's almost like a cliff is how a lot of people describe it, where all of a sudden you don't have structure, you don't have a program to go to every day necessarily. And really now you're looking to fill up that time. And especially with a lot of these young adults, a job, finding a full-time job is a challenge, difficult, or even if they are capable, because they're at risk of losing their disability benefits, they're not going to work more than 15 hours or whatever that is a week because of that. So anyway, that is a huge bonus or plus that I want to always emphasize. Now, social engagement, of course, being able to reach out socially and maintaining connections with other people who have moved away, gone off to college, or gotten married or have a family. There's a lot of people who might move, but a lot of times for these young adults, they're left behind. So maintaining that connection is a huge positive. Just a reminder, optional, type in the chat if you have other positive outcomes or things that have really been helpful in social media. Please do share with us. Now, negative outcomes, these are some, but there's definitely the physical risks. And, we'll talk a little bit more, but a lot of times uh, there are friend requests that come in, and a lot of young adults will interpret it as someone who really is their friend, or they want to connect. And so they will accept those. And then that leads to a lot of other issues, including physical harm. Now, there's also on a more day-to-day level, the social harm that happens, where a lot of times the usage of social media, they may not use it according to what is typical, and because of that, it causes relational damage. I'll talk more about details of this later about why, but just wanted to bring up, some of those issues. And then psychological damages, really social anxiety, right? Anxiety, depression, ADHD are commonly co-occurring. And so it just gets much worse, where if you are unsure about, you message someone, there's nothing in the interface that tells you, did they see it? Did they read it? Why aren't they responding? And then it can lead to that self-doubt and just, spiral, basically. It's thinking, oh, what's going on? And then it gets really, really bad. We have young adults who will withdraw from society, from their day programs for a few months before their support network can coax them back. And so the negative outcomes are much greater for this population in general than the general population. So please, do share experiences you've had, or those that you support. And we always love to hear ideas. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about those personal traits that are unsupported by social media and that can lead to some of these harms. Um, so one of them is having, for lack of a better phrase, something I label more of a literal interpretation of the interface. And so one way this comes across is trusting the content at face value, seeing that there's a friend request. Oh, there is this woman. Oh, she looks pretty. She says she wants to be my girlfriend, and just believing that. And I think that makes it very hard, because uh, then a lot of times we would see their friend lists, and it would be, hundreds, thousands of pictures that, from our point of view, we definitely doubted, whether they were real people, and there were like dangerous interactions going on with a number of them. And so this ends up being really difficult. And so understanding that what you see is not necessarily, number one, an actual, real depiction of that person, might not be the real picture, but actually, number two, even if it is a real picture of them, that this is not their complete life, right? So one of the issues we saw a lot was really people feeling kind of depressed or just down about themselves, because they see their friends and they're doing all these fun things, and they seem to be doing successfully, and all this great stuff is being posted on social media, and realizing that that's not a full picture, and that is, a very, very small piece, and who knows, maybe not even an accurate piece of their life. That was hard for a lot of young adults to understand. And again, a lot of this does affect some people in the general population, but to a much greater degree, it happens with this population. Another way this came across is that friend label. So that was so problematic, where really the idea. So I would, when I first started this research from my neurotypical perspective, I would say, okay, let's look at all the friends you have. So on Facebook, all the friends you have. Now tell me, which ones are your real friends? And the response I always got back was, well, all of them. And I was always surprised. And then looking through and talking through later on, it was, excuse me, I'm a little dry here, but it became clear, oh no, these are people they've never met before. This person is actually probably, more of a bad actor, et cetera. So, what we realized was that they were interpreting this friend label as because this label says this person is a friend, then they are a friend. They're an actual friend. And this happened both with bad actors, but also with acquaintances. This quote comes from a client who is talking about their sister's friend, who they connected with as a friend on Facebook. And then the client started treating that individual as a, really close friend. And then the sister's friend had to say, we're not that close. We don't know each other that well. And so these labels are really problematic where if you call someone a friend on Facebook and then that gets interpreted as, okay, because it says friend, they really are friends, as opposed to thinking, oh, are they really friends? Should I, label them that way? Then it ends up leading to these behaviors that are going to cause friction in relationships or lead to, friending bad actors. And so again, go ahead and feel free to type in any time where like a literal interpretation of a feature or interface has caused problems. So another underlying trait that ends up being unsupported by social media is the idea that the instructions and the interface elements they're interpreted as instructions of what to do. And so we saw this. Here's an example of Facebook. It's a status field. And the reason I keep on using a lot of these Facebook examples is because a lot of the young adults we worked with did use Facebook. Now that varies greatly, right? In certain locations, geographies, groups, it's a different platform. But this did apply to many different platforms. But a lot of the Facebook ones were very, like, the most problematic. So I bring those up a lot. But here, it is a status field where you can type in something to post and share with your whole network, with all of your friends. Now you can see the message on there, the gray message that is meant to be a suggestion for something that you could type, says, "What's on your mind, Sinroom?" Now, if you interpret that as an instruction to act, it could be very problematic. In fact, we had a young man who lost his job because he's really upset and one evening typed that he hated his boss, etc. But his boss was one of his friends on Facebook, and then he was fired. And so this can be very misleading and problematic. Another example here is the comments. So every single post has a little field underneath it that says, "Write an answer." Now, one thing that puzzled me until we looked more closely at the interface was, why were so many of these young adults constantly replying to every single post that other people were posting? And that led to a lot of relationship friction, including also more extreme cases where restraining orders. And so if that's the case, like, why this behavior? And then if you look at the interface, well, it tells you to write an answer. So if I'm following this as an instruction, I'm going to write an answer. And so, a lot of times this would happen, and the young adults, they wouldn't understand why the other person was bothered or, thinking they were stalking them. And then when they would be blocked or unfriended, then they would reach out and try to apologize, which would make the situation even worse because they're trying every way they can to reach this same person who just blocked them. And so, really, these interface elements end up being interpreted in a way that leads to so many problems. So definitely redesigning a lot of these elements through the lens of neurodiversity could help a lot. And then finally, just one final example here where we asked individuals about what kind of information they shared on social media, their personal contact information, phone number, email. That can be sensitive, right? And this woman, when we asked her, she said, "Oh, I never share that," right? Like, that is, like, I understand that's a privacy issue. I don't share that. But when we looked at her account, it was on there. It was on the profile fields. Now, if you look at the profile fields, you can see interpreting this as an instruction, again, can lead someone to go ahead and fill that in. And when we asked her about this, she said, "Oh, well, I had to share my phone number here because I made my account and it said phone number or email. So, obviously I have to do something." So even despite wanting to be private or having learned that there's certain information that you shouldn't share, if the interface is instructing you to do something and you feel like that is an instruction, then it may actually end up going against what they already know about what they should do to keep their information private. So another example here is always engaging with what they see. So, one thing we saw a lot was really people feeling like they have to go and see all the different posts. Now, of course, in the more general population, a lot of times we'll refer to this as fear of missing out, right? But this ended up being to a much greater degree where it's if there's something there, if something appears on the interface, I have to engage with it. I have to look at it. And it's fear of missing out, but it's actually more than that. It's a I visually see something, and so I have to engage, right? It's the sensory differences of, okay, if I hear a drop of water that's maybe very quiet to everyone else in the room, but for the person on the spectrum, it's like, no, like I hear that and I am focusing on that. It's the same type of phenomenon with the visual in social media. This is another example. One of my researchers mentioned, he's like, oh, I let me give you another example here, which is his inbox is completely clean, no new mail. He cannot have anything sitting in the box. He needs to take care of it right away. My inbox, on the other hand, would be atrocious, tens of thousands of emails I've just kind of let go and not looked at, and I'm like, I'll just ignore it. However, for this population, that is not something that is ideal. It's you as soon as they see it or know that something is there, they need to deal with it. And so that can lead to a lot of information overload. Interfaces that have a lot of information, extra information all over, a lot of additional features, that can be really problematic and lead to that mental overload and that visual overstimulation for this population. Um, Now, another example is, we talk to people, and in our initial interviews, we heard over and over again, there's so much drama on social media. I just they hated the drama. That was the number one thing that they didn't like. And of course, we anticipated, oh, okay, people are probably harassing or bullying, and that. Of course, that would be problematic. But it turned out that for a lot of people, it wasn't that they were being targeted, although a lot of people are, but even just seeing other people fight or other people being mean, that actually caused enough, conflict and stress that it bothered them, as if they were the ones being targeted. And so, just realizing that seeing something like ignoring that the common approach of, oh, just ignore it if it doesn't matter, that doesn't apply here when you're trying to support neurodiversity. Another trait that we notice is really just this expectation of feedback. And traces back to those characteristics of uncertainty leading to anxiety. And we notice this a lot, especially in this one example. So this happened very often. So this is a screenshot of Messenger, and people can message back and forth to a single person or to multiple people. It used to be part of Facebook. Now it's a standalone app where you can send messages. Now, there were a couple of very common sources of anxiety here. Number one, and this mixes with that kind of literal interpretation, in this case, unfortunately, an incorrect interpretation, where here you can see there's a check mark. So someone types a message and a check mark appears. And then they don't get a response. And they think, okay, well, let me send it again. Hello? Another check mark appears. I had a woman show me on her phone, like, look, it got sent, that person read it. And so she was interpreting that this check mark meant they have read it. And she's like, why didn't they respond? Now, number one, that causes an anxiety because they're expecting some feedback from that person, because if I have said something to you, then you should be responding, or at least the interface should tell me what is going on. And having no feedback, not knowing like why you're not responding, that can lead to a lot of anxiety because I'm thinking you're ignoring me, or are you mad at me? And we saw a lot of these, maybe like 50 messages in half an hour or an hour because they got no response. But of course, the other person often hadn't seen it yet, or maybe they're in the middle of a meeting. And so they didn't respond. And that ended up really quickly spiraling. But another source of this anxiety is this misinterpretation here, right? Where they thought that this actually meant that someone read it, but it actually means technically that the message was sent, but actually not received yet. If you look at the Facebook support documents, and they're constantly changing icons, so it may have changed, in the past week or so. We're always chasing the new Facebook features because they're always changing. But that incorrect interpretation of what the icon meant and the ambiguity behind what that actually means is another source of anxiety and a problem. And so this is something we notice a lot and led to a lot of relationship friction. Another characteristic here is having clear expectations. So expecting, for example, friends to give complete access to me on Facebook. So if I'm friends with you, I should be able to see every single one of your posts and comment on everything and interact completely and fully. If you don't always show me your post, or if I'm blocked in some way, that can lead to extreme anxiety, because if we're a friend, then we should have complete access and trust. If you block me in any way, then maybe you don't think I'm your friend. I thought we were friends. And so, those very clear boundaries of, friends give complete access. We saw that a lot, and that caused a lot of anxiety. One client talks about how mentally it messes with him, and he asks, did I do something? Do I do something wrong? And so it's very hard, because this whole concept of friending really ends up being problematic, where functionality of, oh, I don't want to see a lot of posts from somebody, can't be decoupled from whether I'm friends with them. Another example that we saw a lot was, the staff member talks about somebody who would see pictures of other friends going out together and think, oh, they must all hate me because I'm not there right now. There's a picture here and I didn't go to that event. And that's something that social media has introduced, because before social media, some of my friends go out and they go do something, I may not be aware of that, right? But now in social media, if it's posted and what everyone is doing is constantly being posted, then I'm seeing lots of these pictures of other people doing fun things, and I am not with them. And so this idea that, if I am a friend, I should have complete access, I should be doing everything, I should have been invited, that ends up being really difficult, and psychological anxiety can come from that. Another example here is really having single rule-based decisions. And so a lot of these young adults would have certain rules to help them decide whether to accept a request or not. And this client talks about how she would accept all friend requests from females and deny all requests from males. So in her mind, it was safer, because she's a female, to connect with females. However, the hard part about this is that a single rule is not quite enough to keep them safe. It could be somebody who is pretending to be a female. Just because they're female doesn't necessarily mean they aren't a bad actor, or that there won't be problems. And then another example of this idea of having clear expectations, or expecting that all expectations that they have are, clear and the right expectations, is assuming a single audience. And so another aspect of social media is a lot of times you post and then a lot of people can see that. Now there are complex privacy controls, et cetera, that can be used. But by default, if I post, then everyone in my friend list or all of my followers will see what is going on. However, for a lot of these individuals, they would think, oh, I am posting this picture and it is for that person. They wouldn't use any technical settings or any way to limit that post to only go to that person. But because they think that that's where it's going, they will go ahead and post it and be like, okay, that's the person who will see it. And that led to a lot of other unintended consequences, where they would post and it's supposed to go to one person, but a much broader audience actually saw it. So that was problematic. Okay, I'm going to pause. I've been speaking a lot. And Kirsten, I'm wondering if you can summarize some of the responses that we've been getting.
Yeah, definitely. So we definitely found, in the chat, there were definitely a lot of positive outcomes that people had posted about. So the main ones were with the social benefit of social media use. So it helps individuals not feel alone, but also social media allows for people to socialize without having to have physical mobility. So it gets rid of that constraint. In terms of the negative outcomes, people had mentioned bad actors. So being scammed and taken advantage of, or being cyberbullied by mocking. Also, this kind of the concept of literal interpretation causing difficulties. So taking verbal expressions literally, which can lead to issues or harms. There was some people had noted to the current tactics that they're taking to keep their children safe. So by having technology-free days for their children. And then finally, there was one question for you, Dr. Page, which is someone was asking how to get their child who is an adult, but they have full conservatorship of, to open up about their social media use.
Yeah, so that is an excellent segue into our next section here. There's no, straightforward answer, but I can talk about the different mediation strategies that we saw, as well as what would lead to people shutting down about their social media use versus opening up. So let's dive right into that. And thank you so much for your participation. Okay, so adults with autism or autistic adults, whichever term you prefer, how are they supported by their network, meaning just all the people around them who help them on a day-to-day basis? Our research, as I said, involved a really broad spectrum of folks in that support network to understand, with all these different challenges, what are you doing? How are you supporting your young adults? The interesting thing here is it seemed like by default, at least for the individuals that we were working with, and a lot of them were living at home with their parents, as well as, a number who are more in residential communities. So those are the ones that we're thinking about here. A lot of times they were actually pretty open by default about issues. And a lot of times they were very open to staff. And so we noticed that, caseworkers or staff, service providers that they interact with on a day-to-day basis, they're very open to just telling them what happened. And a lot of times the staff talked about how even if it's something where the young adult was the one who, quote unquote, inflicted or did something wrong, right? Like not purposefully, right, necessarily, but even in those cases, they're very open and willing to just say, oh, this is what I did. Was it wrong? Do you feel like that's why the person's offended? And so by default, we noticed that behavior. And definitely clients talked a lot about reaching out to their parents when something happened. Um, and then another way that they would find out about issues going on social media is sometimes they would just go and detect it by this first quote is a sibling who also works, in one of these organizations, but she says she just picks up his phone. And a lot of times her brother has these girlfriends that just want his money, and he's on Social Security, so it's not like he makes a lot. But the first of the month, she knows that they're going to be reaching out and trying to hang out with him so that he'll buy them things. And so she'll just pick up her phone and just look at it, pick up his phone and see what's going on. And then they can have a conversation and troubleshoot. In fact, adult siblings were a really huge source of support, I think, as we'll talk about a little later, because the power dynamic there, the siblings don't really have that ability or will not go and say, oh, sorry, you can't use social media or I'm taking away your phone. But yet they are also very trusted because they've grown up with their sibling. And so, and they also have a lot more technical ability and understanding a lot of times than the parents. So that is definitely one source we noticed of joint troubleshooting that happened that seemed more effective and also avoided some of those power dynamics that I'm going to talk about later that cause young adults to shut down if they think their phone or their social media is going to be taken away. And then, another father talked about how his wife is friends with a lot of people so that they're all on social media and checking in once in a while or saying, hey, you should look at your, child's page. You should look at your son's page. Just there's something going on here. And so it really takes a community sometimes. A lot of times adult siblings can act as that as well because they are on social media already. So they're more likely to be able to check in more often because they're using it already. And so often when there's an issue, it was more effective when there was someone else looking because even though you have the young adult, even if they're willing and open to talking, they don't always recognize when there's an issue or if there's a friend request that comes in that could be problematic. And so we noticed that it was more effective when there was someone there who's actively involved and checking and having conversations. Now, one interesting aspect here is that a lot of the safety and privacy rules about what you should share, who you should friend. They were all very externally defined. So with all of our young adults, a lot of times they would say, "Oh, I won't do this. I won't post this kind of information." But it was always like, because my family told me so, or because that person will get mad if I do this. It wasn't an internally driven um, rule. And so that's something to be aware of, which is, I parenting teens or other populations, there's like a reliance on, oh, okay, they know that's going to be unsafe or they're going to feel unsafe. That did not happen with, the individuals we've worked with and observed. And so just being very aware that um, helping to define those rules and tell them and externally, provide sort of those guidelines, it will be very important. Um, Now, another thing we noticed is that with some of these rules, repetition was really important. And so, this client talks about how she was going to post something, but she decided not to because she'd been talking to her mom about it and realized she ran into a lot of trouble the last time. And then subsequent times, she's tried to recognize and realize she shouldn't repeat that same situation. And here, she finally is like, I don't think I learned my lesson last time, so I'm not going to post. I'm not going to even try to engage. Now, of course, it's a double-edged sword in a way where maybe like that keeps them from engaging at all, which is also difficult. But she does realize that there are some safety implications there because it went so badly before. Um, Now, one thing about when the support network should be involved, we notice that a lot of times, if you can troubleshoot at the time that something is happening, that is more effective because a lot of the staff talked about how even though the individuals were so open with them and shared what happened, it was pretty much always after the fact. A lot of times because when they're in the day programs or in the trainings, they're not allowed to be on their cell phones, right? And so a lot of what's happening or the problems are occurring outside of the hours of that program. And so they're coming in after the fact saying, oh, this happened. And then there's very little that the staff can do at that point to help them prevent. All they can say is block. That's pretty much the most common reaction. Just block that person because now it's just damage control time, or, I'm sorry. But we noticed that clients who were able to reach out to their adult siblings like in real time and message them and say, hey, like, why is this happening? Or do you see what's going on? They were able to troubleshoot in real time and figure out a strategy or at least understand what was going on a little better. Same thing with here, another quote where a parent talked about how their adult young adult stays at home and lives with them. And so because she's there all the time, he can just right away say, hey, this person keeps calling, this is happening right now. And I think it's a phishing scam, and verify and kind of joint troubleshoot to talk it through. And the parent is able to, in real time, say, yes, that example right there. If you don't know what they're talking about or who that is, don't give them any information. And so really the most effective mediations are a combination of having someone they can reach out to, whether virtually over messaging to like a sibling who lives far away at this point, or in person if there is a parent around, plus having parents and others kind of checking periodically on the social media and seeing what's going on and seeing if there are conflicts appearing. Um, and I did just talk about this, which is delayed mediation was really, ineffective. Um, and now, okay, this is talking about like tensions and benefits from this mediation. So this gets back at the idea of, well, how will they be open or when will they shut down? Like what might happen here in the mediation that could go wrong, right? So first, the benefits. So we notice that there's definitely a huge benefit when the support network was much more involved knowing what was going on. And I think it's really hard because a lot of parents, especially, they are older and they're not necessarily on social media, or they're not on the same social media platforms. And they also don't actually understand how a lot of those privacy controls work. So it is difficult there. But those who were able to be involved or who were checking up, they did learn a lot more about their young adults. They were able to see when they're depressed or having a hard time, and that gives them a lot of context for how they might interact or approach their young adult. And this parent talks about how, hey, her daughter now puts how she feels out on social media because that's how she can express that. Verbal expression may not be as easy, and knowing when to, or how to express that, can be difficult. But now she's found social media as this avenue to express her emotions, and so that's a way now she can actually communicate and be aware of what's going on. Um, Another benefit of mediation is that digital literacy. So back to the parent example from before, where there was a man who said, "Okay, I think this is a scam," and the parent can in real time teach some of that digital literacy. So that is a benefit. And of course, it goes back to a collective effort. So the staff, they can't necessarily address something in the moment because they're not using social media at that moment when they are in the day programs. But they can bring back some of the issues to the family and talk about, oh, this is an issue, so that the parents can look out for it. So really reinforcing, both at home and in work or wherever they are, trying to make sure that everyone's aligned and knowing what's going on, what some of the problem points are, is huge. In fact, we notice with a lot of young adults, often they have uh, one specific type of problem, or more, but there are a specific set of problems that they deal with, and they struggle with the same problems over and over and over again. Now, of course, those problems are different from individual to individual. They're all super, super different. And so getting to know a specific young adult and what their particular struggle is really helpful, because likely that is the struggle they're going to continue to have for a very long time. Okay, but now here to the tensions. And I probably, again, don't have to tell you all this, but, support networks are very overwhelmed. I'm talking about these best practices for being very actively involved and monitoring, but, it's hard, especially, even super organized parents. This is a staff member who talked about, they're trying to be organized, they're trying to do their best. But, sometimes social media is low on the list because there are a lot of more physical needs and actual, feeding them and keeping them housed, et cetera, that are going to be top priority. But even then, even if they do are able to get that time and mental energy to help with the mediation, there's also this tension of respecting the young adults' adulthood, right? They are young adults now, of course. Trying to keep them safe, and then whether they have guardianship or not, that kind of changes that dynamic a little. But either way, it is still we want them to be independent, but safe. And so that's going to be hard. And another tension really is uh, this safe. I guess I talked a little bit about safety and independence, right? It's Parents struggle to figure out, okay, do I completely take them off social media? Because the goal really is to help them live independently eventually, right? And so, like, how do we scaffold that, and how do we help them learn if we just say no social media? And it ends up being this tension where we notice that young adults who felt either the staff member or a parent would take away their technology or say no social media, they ended up not talking about their problems anymore. They would completely shut down. Now, if that wasn't a threat, they were completely okay opening up, even if they got into dangerous, difficult situations. And some pretty nasty ones that involve like legal ramifications and in law enforcement. They didn't necessarily shut down because of the gravity of the situation, but because of the threat that the parent would say, okay, I'm taking away your technology because it's a lifeline for a lot of them. It is a lifeline to social connection, to interest, and so it ends up being a tension where you want to help them stay safe, but if that ends up being a threat, then they end up shutting down. And so striking that right balance is definitely a challenge. Okay, so Kirsten, we don't have too much time, but maybe if you could spend like 30 seconds summarizing any insights here.
Yeah, definitely. So I think the big one, so there were a few more notes about kind of benefits and harms of social media. So the benefits being the ability to kind of spread information on how to protect individuals in this population. And then for harms, it kind of again goes back to maybe literal interpretation of difficulties in reading the tone of social media posts and replying earnestly to sarcastic remarks. Some people had noticed that it noted that it is hard to balance a child's or their child's sense of being an adult while simultaneously trying to assist in keeping them safe. Um, and then there were also a couple questions that people asked. So I guess the one that's kind of very relevant to what we just covered was how can you mediate with dating apps? Are there specific factors to look for or be careful of?
Right. That could be a whole nother talk and presentation. And it's an area that we have not been able to dig too far into. We've definitely we know there's a need, and that's probably going to be the next direction. But I think a lot of what I'll talk about with the digital literacy of understanding that people don't always present themselves honestly, et cetera, that's going to be very relevant. And again, I don't have solutions. Right now we're just trying to figure out, how we can best support this population. But I think with dating apps, it is a huge, huge opportunity for them to connect. But again, being somebody who they can talk to and knowing that they're not going to say, okay, so if the young adult feels like you're going to take away their dating apps and take away that avenue of connection, from what we've seen, they will be very likely to never talk about it and not consult with you at all. However, if you leave the conversation open and you're able to discuss more about, okay, do you think that's a real profile? Do you think that's a real person, et cetera? And do they seem safe? That will probably be your best avenue. This active mediation definitely seemed to work the best from what we've seen, but it does require spending time and getting into that dating app yourself and getting to know the technology. So another thing we're going to look to in the future is really a lot of the digital literacy for the parents, because that is definitely a challenge that makes it hard for you to monitor and see what's going on. Okay, so I'm going to now jump to the next portion, which is, and I'm going to go ahead and just kind of skip that, but I'm going to give some recommendations for how to work with your young adult. And this is for social media, and our current curriculum and a lot of our research looks at Facebook, Instagram, and then we're branching out. There's definitely TikTok, YouTube, et cetera. That kind of gets mixed in there as well. But this also applies to dating apps and to any other online medium. And so, the first recommendation I would have is really establish a common vocabulary with your young adult. Understanding what it means to be a friend. That's a huge one. Anything on the interface that has a label that says friend, or has some sort of label that sounds like this is labeling my social relationship, realize that they may take that very literally and treat that person like a friend. Same thing with the messenger indicator, teaching them exactly what those mean. That can help a lot. The number two recommendation here, I would say, is understanding that audiences have to be selected. And so when you post anything on social media, helping them understand, like, here is a create a post, and it says underneath the person's name, it says friends. So they're posting out to all of their friends, helping them understand that it does not by default just post to whoever they want it to post to. They need to actually go and change that and select that. That's very important. And understanding that even if you're posting something, so this is all fake information, by the way, not a real person's address or person, but that if they share information, even though they think they're sharing it for a certain purpose, in this case, there's a man who talked about wanting to get money for his cousin who was sick. And of course, he shared his address because that's how you can collect money. How are people going to get the money to him if he doesn't share his address? And he did know, from the privacy and safety lessons and courses that he shouldn't share that for privacy reasons. But this is how he's going to get money for this other purpose. A lot of times they don't connect the idea that something that is posted for one purpose, so collecting money, could be used for a different reason. I think that is a very important concept to try to get across, and that repetition is important. So seeing over and over again what your young adult is posting and having that conversation many times is the best way to lead to reinforcing those ideas. Number two, a cooling off period, sort of that impulse control, making sure that anytime a young adult has a strong emotion, uh, that hopefully they recognize that they shouldn't post at all. Like, doesn't matter which strong emotion, it could be super happy, super sad, but helping them take a pause. And this is where we're actually looking into technology and seeing if we can develop something that will automatically detect sentiment and extreme emotions, and put something in their app to say, oh, hold on, we just detected you have a strong emotion, and to give them some suggestions and guidelines on what they should do before it goes out, or putting in a pause period. But that is all work we are doing on the design side, and hopefully one day we'll have some of those prototypes tested and out there. But I think just teaching your young adult and reinforcing that idea can help. Another is that idea of not taking content at face value. So I won't dwell on this too much, but one thing I do want to point out is they should also watch out, and you should watch out for spelling errors or no profile picture, et cetera, because in the security literature, there are a lot of like you'll get an email or you'll get a request and you'll see spelling errors, and you may look at it and think, okay, this is obviously fake, or this is obviously really unprofessional, but a lot of times the scammers will purposely do that because someone who falls for a scam with a misspelling and that looks unprofessional means they are not going to be able to discern whether something is problematic. And so they want to target those individuals. So that is something to look out for. And then don't not following the prompts as instructions without a good reason. So definitely that's one where you want to make sure that they pause and think about, okay, this is number one, not an instruction, but number two, why would I want to do this? And then the final recommendation is just to remember that what people say and do is not always clear. And just because it looks like on the interface that someone's read it and is not answering doesn't actually mean that they really purposely did that. That's a really hard one, but that ends up causing a lot of friction. And so I'm going to wrap up by just quickly showing our social literacy course. We've been doing an in-person class at a local field site here at a residential program, and we're in our fourth iteration now, and so it's fairly stable, and we have very good results that show that people are actually learning the concepts. And of course, there's so much more work to do in the space, but we have a number of topics: identifying fake profiles, safe privacy settings, et cetera, misinformation, that we cover to empower a lot of these young adults to recognize this. And we do it in a way that we hope will actually match with their learning style, which is not necessarily a neurotypical learning style. So this is just, quickly settings. We show them what are the preferred privacy sensitive settings. A lot of them will have their profile set to public, right? That's just a really simple example. But here we actually have a fake profile module that tells them about, there are profiles that are fake because the people don't look like what it says they look like. That is not their real name, and they don't really want to be your friend. And we actually, based on the literature, have identified a number of commonalities for fake profiles. Now, of course, this is constantly evolving, so our course will probably have to constantly evolve. But at this point, these are the best practices for identifying a fake profile. And one of them is having very few friends. And so we'll say, okay, now go through, look at, do they have fewer, do they have more than 50 friends? Also, if they have too many friends, that's actually an issue as well. So do they have less than 2,000 friends? And we use very concrete numbers. And this is where troubleshooting and co-troubleshooting can help, because you can imagine that, following these literal numbers is a starting point and it helps, but, there's always some exceptions. And then we also have do you have at least 5 or more mutual friends? And so we have a step-by-step, make, this decision, what are the answers? But anyway, in the final version of this module, we say, okay, now, did you answer yes to all these questions? Did you answer no to at least one or more of these questions? And if so, you should talk with someone about this and try to figure out, should you accept this request? If you answered no to almost to all the questions, or 4 out of 5 of the questions, do not accept them, right? So we try to take a very rule-based approach to help young adults, because that is shown to help with this population. And then we have practice modules here. Here is an example of one where in the second screenshot here, we say, does your friend know this person offline? And I think the wording's been actually updated since this. So some of this is, sorry, not quite as clear as I'd like it to be, but, have you met this person in the real world? Have you ever seen them, in the real world? And if so, that's great. It passes the right criteria. If not, there's definitely kind of those danger flags, right? And yeah, our initial results are that students are learning it. Repeating the practice questions has been helpful. Interestingly enough, competition has led to them answering like 100% correct on a lot of these, which is, so this round we are actually implementing a lot more of the competition, and we're going to actually be able to measure more what the results are. But and we've known that it's effective with and for those with and without intellectual disability, and we'll continue to be expanding our populations to see how it works. And our future plans are to cover more social media platforms, enroll more field sites, but also we're starting a waitlist for individuals to take this online. So, if you don't go to a day program, or you just need to take it on your own schedule, we are developing that version. So, please do feel free to reach out to us. You can fill out this Google form to participate or learn more. And actually, this next slide, same QR code here. So you can look at there. You can do that, or you can just contact us directly through email if you want to learn more or share any of your experiences. So with that, I thank you so much. Some of our publications that this work is based on are here, so you can learn more, but we are continuing in this space. And I welcome any questions for anyone who wants to stay on. And maybe, Kirsten, we should even start with you, because maybe you have those questions in the chat already.
Yes, I have some. Let me pull them up. So I know one other person had asked about whether the participants that we work with interact with other autistic adults on social media, and what the effects of that are.
Yeah. So definitely. And in fact, it ends up being really hard, because one example I had in the slides was a young man whose girlfriend was also on the spectrum, and the girlfriend posted pictures that are inappropriate to share publicly on his wall, and it was meant to be a personal message. And neither of them realized that was happening. And it's because for both of them, they both thought, well, this is who I am posting for, and this is who it's meant to be sent to. And so they weren't thinking about that wider audience of, oh, actually, everyone can see the pictures that we are posting back and forth. And then there's also a lot of the, we talk about the double empathy problem, but there's also the sort of, someone being really upset because, for example, one woman, she was messaging with her friend who was also on the spectrum, and then her friend said something like, I'm going to bed, good night, to end the conversation. But then, that first friend was kind of like, oh, like, that's really rude, and was really upset. But of course, that second friend also was kind of like, why are you upset? Like, this is the end of the conversation. And so there's definitely a lot of misunderstanding and communication in terms of intention over social media, or just messaging in general. And so, it ends up being really tricky because I think there are lots of different audiences, and I'll mention also there have been efforts to create, let's say, social media just for individuals on the spectrum, and have a community where it is, perhaps just neurodiverse individuals. But number one issue is that a lot of them, they want to connect with everybody. They don't just want to be limited to other people who are on the spectrum. But again, just because everyone is on the spectrum doesn't actually mean the communication is better either necessarily. It can be, right? If they're both very interested in the same topic, then it can be, because then maybe they both want to talk about Disney, a lot, and that works out. But then there's a lot of those social frictions where, one of the big challenges we hear about all the time is, I just don't know how to say something, or I have to think really hard to figure out, how to say it, what I should, if I should even say it, and, what I should say. And so that ends up being really hard, regardless of whether they're communicating with someone else who's on the spectrum. I mean, obviously, there are also a lot of benefits, because sometimes that makes it easier, because they're both like, okay, we can skip all the niceties, right? If they're friends, they already know each other. We don't need to like have introduce those neurotypical ways of having small chat, et cetera. But again, it's not straightforward.
And then there was another question about, are there any social media platforms that you think should just be avoided? And the example that this person brought up was Snapchat.
Right. So, you know, it's not a black and white answer, because there's a lot of social support that comes from different platforms. And a lot of times, what platform they're using really depends on what everyone else is using. So if their friends are all on Snapchat, then they're going to be missing out. And that's why it's so hard, because even though Facebook is very ambiguous in many ways for its interface, it's like, well, but if everyone's on it, that's how I'm going to connect. So it makes it very hard. Technically speaking, you could definitely say there are certain features that cause a lot of problems. But the point of social media is that social connection and getting access to resources. And so because of that, I wouldn't, there's not a blanket statement I could make. It's more of a, you're going to have to weigh the pros and cons, because if that means they're completely socially isolated, that ends up being a huge problem as well, right? That can lead to a lot of risk for these young adults who are already at high risk for mental health issues. And so, I wouldn't want to say avoid that platform if that ends up completely cutting them off socially.
And then we had another question about whether you can recommend any workshops or resources about the hidden rules of dating apps.
Um, I don't have any off of the top of my head, but we can look into that. But it is actually a new space, and there's not a lot of research in that space yet. We've seen very few scholars. Like, there are some publications, so I am happy if you want to reach out. We're happy to point you to papers that have been published in that area. But it is very new, and yes, we're very aware that it is probably the next space we need to go into.
Well, with that, I think we've gotten to the end of all of the questions.
Great, fantastic.
Well, thank you both so much for this presentation today. It was terrific, and we've had really great feedback, as I'm sure Kirsten can probably share that with you, Dr. Page. We'd love to have you back in the future. This has been a really popular topic. So for everyone who's still here, we have posted the knowledge quiz. So if you want to take that, the link is in your reminder email. We also popped it in the chat. We had some questions about the handouts as well. I had those in the chat. They are also on the playback page. So if you go to that original page where you registered, that's in your reminder email as well, and you can get the handouts there. So we'll hope to see you both in the future, and thanks for all your great work.
Thanks. There's a lot of work to be done in this space, so I'm sure there will be more.
Great, terrific. See you next time.
Thank you.